Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 8, Episode 2, a brand new episode for you. This is, yes, technically Episode 2. There was an Episode 1.5, which I think I actually listed as 11 because there's only 10 in the season. If you haven't heard it, it's the one that came out in the middle of the week last week, and it is a microphone comparison. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. It's a super fun episode. It was an accidental episode. It's the first time I've ever accidentally recorded a podcast episode, and it also generated, as they say in the biz, the most engagement I've ever gotten from an episode, which just means like people responding to it. So I want to respond to those responses in a bit, but before we dive into any of that, I definitely want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of not just this episode, but this entire season of the Enthusiasm Project, and that is Riverside.fm. I've used Riverside, as you know, for quite a few years now, both as a host and a guest, and it's always been really great, but I think it's only gotten better, and I've just come to appreciate it more and more. Riverside lets you easily record studio quality remote audio and video from anywhere with no latency, regardless of internet bandwidth. Riverside automatically records locally to each participant's computer and uploads it all to the cloud. This means your guests don't have to do anything, and you'll get full quality isolated audio and video tracks for each person. Locally recorded files are supported all the way up to 2160 4K video and 44.1 or 48,000 kilohertz audio. And there's even a mobile app to make things easier for you and your guests. You can publish and share your recordings immediately or put them into your editing software of choice with separate audio and video tracks. If you'd like to give Riverside a try, use the link in the description for this episode along with promo code TOM15 for 15% off of your subscription. So thank you again to Riverside.fm for sponsoring this episode and this season. They are the first and best sponsor this podcast has ever had. I really, really appreciate it. Riverside has come in quite handy lately because it's just quite excellent. So we're actually going to talk about that in a little bit too. Before that though, let's sort of continue our conversation from where we were at before, which kind of has to do with these microphones. So if you don't know the backstory, basically what I did was I was curious about, actually the backstory, the way back story is that I have all these microphones, right? And I got the Blue Sona recently and I really, really liked it. I was super impressed with it, which is not the microphone I'm on right now. And then not long after I got the Sona, Earthworks sent me the Ethos. And I was so impressed with the Ethos that I was like, oh, I feel like my ranking of what I think my favorite microphone is and the one I like using the most has changed quite a bit. And so what I wanted to do actually was do an Instagram live stream because I have the little vertical YOLO box that is like lets you use multiple really nice cameras for Instagram, which is kind of cool. And so I had that all set up, and then I couldn't get the technical side of things working out yet. So I just sort of gave up and was like, okay, I'm just going to record this mic comparison for myself so that I can listen back. Because when you're listening with headphones, this is why getting the feedback, not the bad kind of mic feedback, but the feedback on my mics was really good. Because when you're recording something, you're hearing in your headphones, like right now I'm listening to my voice in my headphones, but you're also hearing your voice in your skull and in your body, and it's not exactly what it sounds like. It's like how your voice, even normally, I guess, it's the same thing. When you hear your recorded voice played back, like, that's not what I sound like. No, that's exactly what you sound like. You're just stuck in your own head all the time. So I wanted to find something that was different from, as Tom DeLonge would say, the voice inside my yed. And sorry, I'm very excited that Blink-182 is a band again. That makes me happy. So I did that, and then halfway through recording those comparisons, I was realizing I was talking like it was a podcast, so I thought, oh, this would actually be a really fun thing to release as an episode so I can get other people's thoughts on it. And it's been super helpful, so thank you to everybody who has sent in emails and comments and just quick direct messages and stuff about that. It has been incredibly fun. So for today, I am actually using None of the microphones that anybody listed as their favorite, but one of my personal favorite, and it is the Lewitt LCT240 Pro. I really love this microphone. As soon as I pulled it out in the comparison, I was so impressed with it, and I really, really love this microphone. I'll just pause that thought right now. It's a great mic, and it's relatively affordable. I was able to weed out some microphones in the comparison, both from my own opinion and from the feedback of others. And what I've done now is I've narrowed it down to sort of like the dream team of just my microphones. It's not like every microphone in the world or everything that's available everywhere. It's just the ones I have, because over the years I've amassed like a pretty decent and varied microphone collection. And so I've narrowed it down to what I kind of consider the dream team. And what I'm planning to do then is sometime soon do just a live stream on my channel, where it's kind of the same thing as that episode where we're going and listening and knowing that people are listening on all kinds of different speakers and different headphones and sound systems, and everybody has different preferences. I kind of want to see if there's one thing where it's like, that is the one. Not necessarily that it means it's the best microphone in the world, but it's the best microphone for my voice in this environment. And I'm also totally aware that half of that is just personal preference. But the dream team, so the Lewitt is still part of it. I'm keeping that there. Of course, because I am biased and partial, the Ethos is part of the dream team. The Ethos is, by the way, I have all of these here. So if you want to watch the video version, you can become a channel member or join Patreon and see the microphone. Otherwise, you can just imagine the microphone, because it kind of is the same thing. So the Ethos is the one that I'm feeling very partial to at the moment. And I only had actually one person say that they liked it the best on the comparison. I won't lie, I was kind of hoping everybody would be like, whoa, the Ethos, totally the way to go. But it was only one person. But I'm going to keep that in the running because I really love the Ethos. I am also going to keep the Blue Sona in the running, even though everybody who sent me a list, which several people did, some people even sent multiple revised lists after they listened in like different sound systems. The Sona was kind of at the bottom of everybody's list, which made me a little bit sad. But hey, we're trying to be objective and impartial. But I'm keeping the Sona in the mix because I love it, and for reasons I'll explain in a minute. And then the other ones that have sort of hung out with honorable mentions. So the RE20 was the one that most commonly got selected as the microphone on top, like the one that everyone liked the most. So the RE20 got the most positive votes, followed very closely by the SM7B, and a couple people mentioned the Rode NT1, and nobody actually mentioned the Neat King B2, but I'm going to keep it in the running just because it's a newer microphone. It's not a newer microphone, it's a neat microphone, but it's a new microphone that is neat. Yikes. And I'm going to keep that in the running because wow, it is a really great sounding microphone, and I just don't think people have been really exposed to it yet. So those are the ones that are going to be in the live stream. I didn't want to do the full lineup because the logistics of that are just kind of a nightmare. So keeping this to sort of a small thing here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to know as objectively as possible what just sounds the best on my voice in this space that I record most of my stuff in. This is where I do most of that. So doesn't mean I'll never ever use another microphone, because I love switching out microphones. It's really, really fun to try different ones and learn different ones. But I'm essentially looking for what would be in the position that the SM7B has been in for the past year or so for me, which is when I don't want to think about it, when I just need a microphone to record something that I know is going to sound good. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's being a guest on somebody's stream, or just doing a video call or something, and I just need a mic that I don't have to think about. It's going to sound amazing. That has been the SM7B, because, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's the SM7B. Of course it could be that. But now with all of these other options here, because pretty much, yeah, I've gotten all of these other microphones since I've gotten the SM7B. So I think it's worth reevaluating and just seeing what there is there. And I think that's going to be really, really fun, because I guess this kind of is where I can transition into like the title of today's show that we'll touch on in a little bit, which is the democratization of equipment. The fact that these options are here is absurd. It was not that long ago that, I mean, I guess it was kind of a while ago now, but in the grand scheme of things, not that long ago. If you think back I mean, I guess there's the play of like a microphone and its interface, right? So interfaces have come a long way just in recent years. If you go back even like 6 or 7 years, it was pretty grim in terms of interfaces for XLR microphones that were going to really sound good and be able to drive and push a microphone like the SM7B well. Now, every new interface that's released has like 75 decibels of gain. They're all super easy to use. They have all kinds of really cool features. A lot of them are designed with podcasting in mind specifically, so it makes things even better. Something like the Vocaster 2, or I guess the Vocaster 1 if you only want one input. There's just so many options in addition to more microphone options. Like, the Lewitt is new, the King B2 is new, the Ethos is new, the Sona is new. The SM7B, RE20, and NT1 are pretty old. They've been around for a long time. But even though those microphones have been around for a long time, they haven't even been accessible to the average person. Not that the price has changed, but that infrastructure you need to run it, like having something like a Rodecaster or a Vocaster or a Scarlett or whatever it might be that you're running your microphone into, or just getting an affordable mic booster like the Clark Technic CT1. It's like $35. It changes like $35 to $40. And then you can run an SM7B on any interface. That's kind of amazing. That's a pretty new thing. And it kind of goes back to the video I made earlier this year about the Blue Yeti, where the video is called, "Is the Blue Yeti Really That Bad?" And my personal conclusion at the end of the video is no, it's not. It has a reputation for being bad. It's not that bad. The reason it's viewed as being bad is because there are so many other options right now. When the Yeti came out, whenever it was, 2009-ish, around there were no other options really. I guess the Audio-Technica 2020, which was a microphone I was drooling over back, I don't know, like 2008, 2007. Whenever that came out, I really wanted that. I had no reason to get a microphone at the time, so I've never gotten it still. But that was kind of it. There wasn't really a lot of options. And so for $100, you get this microphone that has everything you need, including a stand, so you don't need anything else. Just plug it in and you're all set, and it's going to sound so much better than anything else you've been using since. That's kind of the start of that democratization of stuff. So that's kind of where I want to go into that more, but that's kind of what this is leading into. The fact that I even have these options to use viably is pretty cool. And the other thing throughout this mic comparison that I've been developing, which I think might actually be helpful to other people, keeping in mind this is heavily skewed towards my voice, my use case, my environment. I think I've said that like 3 times now, but very different for other voices. And, I've had people send me messages saying that they liked my voice on a certain microphone. They own that microphone and they hate their voice on that microphone. So much of it really is individual and independent when it comes to microphones, which makes it kind of hard it makes it tough, right? to just figure that sort of stuff out, but it's fun. It's not a bad kind of tough. However, what I've accidentally developed, and I wrote back to a couple people about this, is what I called I've been accidentally making a Venn diagram that sort of has 3 parts. I don't know if that counts as a Venn diagram, if it has 3 overlapping circles, but one of the circles is sound quality, because we're talking about a microphone. Sound quality it's one of those kind of important features for a microphone. The other thing that I'm considering is ease of use. And then the other thing I'm considering is compatibility with different, especially budget interfaces. So this is not like the only way to judge a microphone, but based on my experience, based on the people I encounter a lot, the kind of videos I make, the people I talk to, the people who watch those videos, these seem to be the things that are most important. So if there's a microphone that sounds great, is super easy to use, and is really versatile with a lot of interfaces, that to me is probably going to be the winner, not necessarily just the one that sounds the best. And so that's why I can't stop talking about the Sona. And this is sort of a weird thing, because for me personally, I'm running everything into the Rodecaster 2. That's what I'm running this into right now. And the Rodecaster can handle anything. So any mic without a booster, it's going to sound great. But if you saw my Sona review, or I'm even going to do a video specifically just about this, like high-end versus low-end interfaces, With condenser mics, it doesn't matter as much because they're running off of phantom power. So like the Lewitt that I'm talking into right now is a condenser microphone. It's pretty much going to sound like this on any interface that has phantom power, which is basically any interface. Dynamic mics are a very different story. So that's where, like, if I run the SM7B and the Sona into the Rodecaster Pro, you're listening to two really great sounding microphones, and then, you just form your opinion on that. As soon as I take them and plug them into something like a Focusrite 2i2, the SM7B just falls apart. And it's so quiet and it does not sound nearly as great. Not that it can't sound great with a 2i2, but compared to the Sona, which has a built-in booster, immediately it sounds amazing. The SM7B, I need to connect a booster, and then I'm getting that good quality. So that kind of thing I think is very important to keep in mind as I want to recommend stuff. And there's other things like the reason I mentioned that the reason I love the Lewitt, but it's not really on my list of like what would be the main microphone, does have to do with ease of use. I do have the Lewitt. This is sort of fair and unfair. I have the Lewitt in its shock mount right now, and the shock mount has a connector that comes out of the back. For me, my boom arm, as you see if you're watching the video of this, comes from the side, and there's really no other place for me to put a boom arm that is going to be practical. So the boom arm sort of comes from my side over here, which means the microphone needs to be able to be positioned from the side pointing me. This microphone in its shock mount can't do that. The Rode NT1 can't do that either in the shock mount that mine came with, which is the old one. I have to put in a different shock mount and then I can rotate it. The Neat Kingbee can do that, but it looks a little bit funky. The SM7B, the Sona, and the Ethos can all do that super easily because they have very versatile yokes. The Ethos has this crazy ball mount, which lets you position it absolutely anywhere at any angle and fine tune it as much as you want. It's pretty sweet. And I really love, the SM7B is kind of a classic as far as its mount goes. And the Sona has a really awesome, just modern version of the SM7B's mount that's really simple and easy to use with one hand. So that's like ease of use. I love the way that the Lewitt sounds, but I can't have it be the microphone that I'm using all the time because it's really difficult to position. Right now, I have it on a tabletop stand, and it's sort of facing me because that's the only way I can position it where I need it. And it works great for something like this, but it's not going to be the default that is just ready to go all the time. So those kinds of things become very important. The reason I said that wasn't fair is because I don't have to use the Lewitt in its shock mount. I could put it on one of those little tinier mounts and it'd probably be more versatile, but then it becomes really, really susceptible to handling noise. So again, when we're talking about like ease of use, or maybe that's part of sound quality, I don't know, maybe that's an overlap thing. Handling noise, the SM7B and the Sona, you can smack those microphones and it won't matter. The Lewitt, the RE20, very susceptible to handling noise. The RE20 has like the most ridiculous shock mount in the world, which looks cool, but takes up a ton of space. And the Ethos is actually pretty good at rejecting stuff. So it's all this kind of stuff, like what comes together to make not just the objectively best sounding microphone, but the most practical, easy to use microphone. And everybody who has sent me feedback has been so cool about also including and talking about the importance of just the one you like to use. So even if there is one that sounds the absolute best, if you don't enjoy using it, it's not going to be super fun. And if there's one that doesn't necessarily sound the best, but it's just, there's something about it has like a spark that, I have all these guitars, right, on my wall over here. Some of them, the most expensive one isn't necessarily the one that I'll go to all the time. It's, they all have sort of a different feel, and depending on the style, like it's easier and just, they have a spark, sort of a different spark happening. Same exact thing with the microphones. And then somebody on a YouTube video, a different YouTube video, but I thought this was very appropriate. They made the analogy of microphones being like Harry Potter finding his wand, where it's not that you choose it, but it kind of chooses you, meaning the microphone chooses the voice. You can say, yes, the SM7B is a studio microphone, whatever, the newer NW800 is a piece of junk, but ultimately you put those microphones in front of a voice, and the microphone is going to choose the voice, the one that works best with it. And I thought that was kind of cool too, because there is this intangible thing where you can hear somebody on a microphone, think it's amazing, get that microphone, and absolutely hate it because your voices are totally different. I don't know. I know people have been dealing with this for decades, and I'm like stumbling into this thing. Did you guys know microphones are super subjective and hard to find out? Well, it's true. Turns out it's totally true, and that is a thing that happens. So that's where we're at with microphone stuff. It's been a really fun accidental project to take on that also I think is going to take over or lead into a couple really cool follow-up videos and a live stream and podcasts. And it's just super fun. So thank you so much. If you haven't listened to that episode and you do listen to that episode, still feel free to send me your thoughts if you have them. I'd totally love to hear them. It's been just a ton of fun to do that. Before diving into sort of the broader conversation, I do have a call or a voice submission. If you do ever want to leave voice submissions, just like we've always done in the past, you can send them to tom@hi-my-name-is-tom. Nope, that's the wrong email. You can send them to that one. You can send them at tom@enthusiasmproject.com. Or you can just go to hi-my-name-is-tom.com, and right there on the homepage is a link to submit stuff right away. So this was one that I received right after Heather and I recorded the first episode, so we didn't get to include it. And it is from Bailey Stone, all the way in the land of road, all the way from Australia. Bailey's first message for this season. So take it away, Bailey.
Anything. I know that I personally would really struggle doing that. So massive congratulations. It shows the...
Thank you, Bailey. I started the message in the middle. So yes, everything you were saying, I totally agree with. I can't get the message to go back to the beginning. We're a professional here. Anyway, hey, Bailey. Wait, where does it go? There we go.
Enthusiasm you have for such a great... Firstly, I wanted to say congratulations on getting to season 8 of anything. I know that I personally would really struggle doing that. So massive congratulations. It shows the enthusiasm you have for such a great project that you're doing. I was updating the spreadsheets that I made a few months ago now, probably about a year ago now, actually, that has the links that you often get asked for like your cameras and your software and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed that on your gear page, you use riverside.fm for your remote podcast now. So I guess I have kind of two questions relating to that. Number one is, what do you think about it? Is it worth the investment? You know, I do a podcast with my brother, and currently we're just using Google Meet, and I just strip the audio from that and do it that way. But it obviously doesn't sound great using the Rodecaster. So what do you think about it? Is there, would it be a good alternative? And secondly, why is there any specific reason, I guess, why you stopped using Ecamm Live's interview function for these remote guest calling things? Anyway, thanks, man, and have a good one.
All right, thank you, Bailey. Sorry I had to start your message 3 times or so to get it going, but we got to appreciate the kind words. It is super crazy. Season 8 of a thing is ridiculous, and that is super exciting. I think this specific episode is 127, if I'm not mistaken, which is very cool. So yes, let's talk about Riverside. Obviously, this episode and this season are sponsored by Riverside, but that didn't come out of nowhere. That wasn't like me just twiddling my thumbs and, someone will offer you money for a thing? Sure, sell your soul. No, not the case at all. As I said in the beginning, I've used Riverside for, I think, close to 2 years at this point, over a year and a half. First as a guest, then as a host, and then many times as a guest as well. And I have used it alongside Ecamm's interview function. Of course, other stuff too, like StreamYard and Squadcast and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it, of course, comes down to personal preference. But the reason that I was so excited to be clear, was the one who pitched Riverside on sponsoring this season. So that was my idea. And the reason was because it genuinely solves a problem. Especially over the past few years, I've personally tried to record so many things remotely, and I've worked with people and talked with people who are trying to do the same thing, and there are a million different ways to do it. Probably the one that's going to guarantee the absolute best results is to have both people record locally on their end, and then somebody gets all of those files and edits it all together. The problem with that is it's an awful workflow. It's just the worst because You have to be working with people who are capable of doing that. And I know it sounds really simple, and I'm not talking down to people who aren't, but say you're doing a podcast and you want to have a guest, it's hard enough to book a guest and to get into their schedule and then to give them a list of technical directions to follow. It's really tough. And few things are more frustrating or feel worse than when you do an amazing interview with someone and then you find out like, oh, they weren't actually recording on their end, or they had the wrong input selected. So even though they had a nice microphone in front of their face, they were recording on their camera's microphone from 3 feet away, and the whole thing sounds like garbage. And also just the time things, the number of times where you, the number of times I've personally done remote podcasts, and then you're waiting like, okay, cool. And then the person's like, yeah, I'm going to send you that file. No worries. And you're like, great. And you have to kind of keep reminding them, hey, any chance you're going to send me that file soon? And then to send a file can sometimes, it's, maybe it's Google Drive or Dropbox, but depending on their network connection, just sending that file, if there's a video file along with it, it's even worse. It's frustrating. So that's where the software-based remote recording apps really do come in handy. The reason that Riverside takes the cake for me is because it's the highest quality with the least amount of work. And I think that's, when we talk about Venn diagrams, that's a good overlap, because you do get full quality. So whatever somebody's using, if somebody's using a 720p webcam, it's not going to magically turn it into a 4K webcam, but whatever everyone is using, you can get the highest quality from them. They don't have to have necessarily an absolutely amazing internet connection, because what's happening is while you're recording and while you guys are in your call, everything's basically being recorded to a temporary file on their local machine. So even if you have, your network connection goes in and out a little bit or whatever, everything is being recorded temporarily, locally to their machine in, direct quality, whatever they have. If someone doesn't have a great audio video setup, it's not going to fix that, but whatever they have, it'll do the best quality. And then when it's done, everything gets uploaded automatically. So the only thing the other people have to do is just make sure that a little message isn't there that says, don't close this window, things are uploading. And it's also super duper fast. It doesn't take a ton of time or anything. And then you, as the host, immediately have not just the recording of what you've done, but you have everybody's isolated audio and video. So that brings the question. So that's amazing. And there's no latency and no delay. So that goes over the question of Ecamm, because obviously Ecamm is something that I've used for a long time as well. And Ecamm is still my streaming software. I'm recording this into Ecamm right now. Ecamm is great. And the team behind Ecamm is absolutely wonderful too. And Ecamm does have an interview feature that people work really, really hard on. But I have had reliability issues with the interview feature over the years. And again, I love everyone behind Ecamm, and I know they work really hard, so I'm sure that they're aware of these things, but I know I'm not the only one either, because I happen to have many friends who do podcasts and stuff, and they sort of had these same issues. A big one is delay. For me, sometimes there's a delay and sometimes there isn't. So the season finale of season 7, when Michael was on the show, there was such a delay. I had to go back and re-edit that show to cut out the delay. You can hear it in the episode as we're talking. We still accidentally talk over each other. We had to kind of rehearse beforehand and make sure okay, not to talk over each other. But that does create this unnatural silence. So I had to go through, and what should have been an episode that I didn't have to edit at all, I had to spend an hour editing, which was annoying. And luckily Michael was a tech savvy person. He's familiar with this stuff. He adapted very, very quickly. If you're listening or watching, Michael, hi, I hope you're having a good lunch. But not everybody has that. Not everybody is as familiar with that, especially if for people who branch out and interview and have guests that aren't in the world of also producing their own podcasts. It just seems weird. They're kind of hearing an echo, or they're not sure when to talk, and it can really throw things off. It doesn't happen every time with Ecamm. It only happens sometimes, but you kind of never know when it's going to happen. And so it's what I have found for me is it seems like when I'm actually streaming, it doesn't really happen, because I've had people on and I've been on people's streams many times and everything's great. It's almost like when it's not streaming but recording locally, that's what throws things off. At least I feel like that's the common factor I can find. I'm not sure. And, hopefully at some point, that will be fixed. I know fixing something like that's a lot more complicated than it might sound. And there's other weird things like sort of compatibility issues. So for example, on Riverside, if you're using a Rodecaster, it will automatically detect you're using a Rodecaster and it will give you a little message that says you're using a Rodecaster. Do you have all of your USB mix minus settings set up correctly? Like, it will kind of remind you of those things. Depending on the interface with Ecamm, a thing that has popped up is Focusrites. At least I've seen this with both the the Solo and the 2i2. For some reason, only go in mono. Like the person on the other end, on your end, everything will sound fine. The other person will only get either the left or right channel of audio, and it doesn't matter what settings you change. The only common denominator that I've narrowed this down to, not just in my experience, but across 2 or 3 other shows, is Focusrite Scarlett's. And so I don't want to have to ask somebody, hey, you want to be on my show? What are you using? Are you using a Scarlett? Oh, well, the Scarlett's going to have this problem. And there's also going to be like, I don't want to have to send somebody that tech list of things. Ultimately, I want it to be as simple as a Zoom call, or like Bailey said, Google Meets. But the quality of those is bad, especially if you want to like replay it. Zoom just butchers everything. It doesn't matter how, and I get it. I get why they have to do it. It's a utilitarian thing. But if you're somebody who wants to use that to create a high quality podcast, it's a nightmare. And that's where Riverside saves the day. Also, Ecamm does have the ability to do isolated audio tracks, but not isolated video. And I understand the argument for isolated video in Ecamm Live is almost like the current debate of paying for 4K on YouTube, which is a thing. If you didn't see this past week, Linus Tech Tips did a whole video explaining maybe why YouTube should charge for 4K. And ultimately, it was something that was like, so many creators are uploading in 4K, which puts a huge strain on the system, but a very small percentage of users are actually watching in 4K or even able to actually watch in 4K because whatever screens that they're actually using. And so charging for 4K basically means the people who actually want to use this feature, they're going to be subsidizing the strain it puts on the system. And I kind of feel like the isolated video tracks with Ecamm is similar. It's something I can imagine them eventually doing because it's like people keep asking for it. And even if maybe it's not as simple as they think it's going to be, it's just, give the baby their bottle kind of a situation. But I think it's sort of that, like implementing isolated video tracks is going to be this huge thing. It's like a beast of a thing to add to the software that really only a small number of people are actually going to need or use when it comes to Ecamm. But that's where I think Riverside has the edge because it's like, Ecamm is a software suite, right? It does so many different things, whereas Riverside is like, we're going to do this part of it, this remote recording interview type part of it really, really well. And so, yeah, they're better at that. It's the same way that like, my camera has a built-in microphone, but it sucks because, not that interview mode sucks. That's not at all the analogy, but the built-in microphone on my camera is not great. It does record audio, but my camera is also doing photos and color profiles and image stabilization and all of this other crazy stuff, different frame rates and things. The audio is just one thing that does of many things. And then you get yourself a dedicated recorder and it's like, wow, the audio on this is amazing. Yeah, it's a terrible camera. It doesn't even have one, but it's really good at the specific thing that it's designed to do. And that's kind of why I think Riverside has such an edge. And so after working with Michael, so I've been talking with people from Riverside for like a year and a half now, really. And after the episode I did with Michael, where we had this delay and it was so frustrating and added so much time to my workflow, it was literally like the next day I just happened to sort of get a checking in email, hey, what's up, kind of from someone in Riverside. And I was like, I have an idea. I'm frustrated with what I'm doing as far as remote stuff goes, and I'm only going to be using Riverside from now on. Would you want to sponsor this season of a podcast? So that's kind of where that came about, which I think I'm really glad that Bailey, you asked the question, because obviously, like, it's easy when something is sponsored to, we talked about this kind of thing many times, but not on something that has actually been sponsored. When something is sponsored, it's easy to think that, the person is just saying whatever. Like I just watched yesterday, Gerald and Dunn did a video where he bought all of the Magic Spoon cereals that you often see on like YouTube ads and some channels and things. And there was a kind of a debate in the comments on that of like, are you criticizing people for doing sponsored segments? And he's like, no. I just see these ads. They seem kind of silly. So I just bought the thing from the ad just to see what it's like. But from what he said and from what I've also heard, those cereals really don't taste that good. And so then you see people who are like, wow, this is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. And it's like, is it though? Because objectively, it seems kind of bad. But yeah, so it's always tough when something is sponsored. And so it's nice to be able to say, no, Riverside is an amazing tool. And I appreciate it Riverside is an amazing tool. Ecamm is an amazing tool. I appreciate it very much. Appreciate the team behind it very much. And it serves a lot of purposes. It's like a Swiss Army knife in my workflow. And Riverside is also an amazing tool that solves some very specific problems for me and that I've had very good experiences with over a long period of time. And so that's something that I'm comfortable, like promoting and talking about, because it's also something the same way that, I want to find a microphone that I can recommend to people because I can tell them, yes, this is great. It doesn't really matter what interface you have. As long as you have this bare minimum thing, this is going to work great for you. And I want to have that recommendation. I like Riverside kind of for the same reason, where it's like, you want to do a remote podcast. The idea of having everyone do everything locally seems like a nightmare. So instead, we're going to jump in and just give you this tool to help make things so much easier and just so much smoother. And now we can move into the next part of our discussion, which if you're watching the video version, you just saw a little bit of a jump cut because I can just press pause in Ecamm and then hit resume, and it's super cool. But now, instead of microphones on my table, I have a bunch of cameras, because one thing that I've encountered, this is something that I have a lot of thoughts on. I don't know how to approach it fully yet, so I want to explore it more because it's really important to me, and I would love to distill these thoughts more eloquently so that I can actually condense them into a video that I can share, because I think that it's something that's really important. And it kind of goes off of what Heather and I were talking about in episode 1, which was about being an enthusiast versus an authority or an expert at something, especially in the world of YouTube. And now the idea of the democratization of audio video production equipment, which is something that I'm just really grateful. It's something I kind of got to grow up with I was sort of the perfect age for it. Humble brag, because, I had a lot to do with what age I am. So I was born in 1985, for reference, which is a very weird age to be born at currently, because I only have people telling me I'm either old or young, and nobody's like, yeah, that's like a normal age. But to me, it's a normal age. So I was born in 1985, which was like the height of the home video camera, either VHS cameras, 8mm cameras, and then eventually getting into like VHS-C. Everything is analog. I have a little Sony Handycam here. This is a circa year 2000 Handycam. And this is this specific model, the Sony TRV-37, is the one that I had throughout my entire high school career. It's not the first. Well, actually, hang on one moment. Through the magic of the pause button, I am now holding the model of my very first camcorder, which is the Sony, I think it's the F35, which they ended up having another camera called the F35. This is not that. This is a 1980s Handycam, 8mm Handycam. So this was the camera, the model, not the exact camera, but the model that I, first time I ever held a camera was this. First time I ever took a video, did anything, was this. This is what kicked it off for me. And then that was an old camera that was a hand-me-down. And the first time I ever got my own camera was the Sony TRV-37, right at the beginning of my freshman year of high school in the year 2000. And this thing, I mean, I can't even tell you the hours, the boxes of 8mm tapes going through with this thing. This was the one, I was just telling Heather this the other day. for some reason she was asking about David Fincher, and I was like, oh yeah. She was like, if you heard the name David Fincher, could you think of a movie of his right off the top of your head? And I was like, Fight Club. Because what also came out around my freshman year of high school was Fight Club, which was the first time that I really noticed cinematography in a movie. And David Fincher, I really love his cinematography, and the camera has like a weight and a purpose, and his compositions are just so like specific, and everything's just so well done. And it was the first time I've really noticed that in something. And part of it too is that it's shot at like a really wide aspect ratio. And so I got a little wide angle lens attachment for my camera, and I really wanted those black bars, like the anamorphic super wide thing. But this is, again, before you could just edit stuff on a computer easily. So everything's being edited on VCRs. You can't just add black bars or whatever to your video. So what I did was I put pieces of electrical tape over the front of my lens to do to do fake cinema bars, letterboxing, but it completely did not work because the camera just then focused on the inside of the tape, and you could just see it was just like a bunch of little hairs and stuff, and it didn't work. I thought it was going to be like, yeah, it's going to be brilliant. It did not work. It's not sharp, crisp borders like a letterbox would be, and it completely threw off the camera's focus. Didn't work. But I remember trying so hard to learn about framing my shots and different types of composition. I remember that's even starting to learn about lighting. Okay, this camera does not work well at all in the dark. It needs a lot of light to look really good. So what that means is let's learn about lights. Let's go figure out lighting. We can't just get aperture doesn't exist, Nanlite doesn't exist, all of the Amazon doesn't exist. Well, I guess Amazon existed, but not in the way it does now. Access to just affordable, great video lights wasn't a thing. So it's like, let's go to Home Depot and get a bright work light or something. But even when taking time to practice composition, taking time to pay attention to lighting, being intentional with camera movements, I could never make anything that looked really even close to what a movie theater looked like. And then after it was edited and it had gone back and forth from VCR to VCR, several times, the generational like quality loss was just, it was like everyone in the video was in the witness protection program because you could not identify their faces. Everything was so distorted. And that was about as good as you could get, at least kind of on a budget. Around that same time, I've talked about this before, but Canon had released the XL1, which was the first camcorder. I guess, no, it's not true. It's not the first interchangeable lens camcorder. As we learned, that's the L1. The XL1 is the first interchangeable lens camcorder with 3 chips. So it's a 3 CCD camera. It is digital, takes tapes, but it's mini DV tapes. So technically it's digital. It's not high definition. It's standard definition, but it has a big old lens. You can swap the lens out for different ones. They had a couple of lenses for this mount, not a lot, but you could get an EF adapter and then use any of Canon's other lenses. So what that meant is at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s, a 3 CCD camera, even though it's not HD, was about as good as you could kind of get for broadcast quality because broadcast wasn't HD yet. And you could take this camera, which retailed for about, I think it was $3,000 or $4,000, and you could get something that looked pretty darn good. Like it looked like the local news, a local commercial. You can make a little student film with it, a little documentary style thing, and it's going to look about as good as anything you could see because that's what's on TV. That is about as close as you get, but it was $3,000 or $4,000. My little Sony Handycam was $350, brand new. So this cost 10 times that price, which meant it was entirely out of my price range. So I just put a picture of it on my bulletin board, and it was like, one day that would be cool. And then in, the summer of 2020, I bought one off eBay for $400, and it's freaking cool. But your phone takes better video than the XL1 does. And then there was the move into high definition. So let's see. I don't want to go too far beyond my knowledge here, or, I don't want to get too far out of my lane. But if you've ever wondered why they can re-release old films like The Godfather or something in HD or 4K and it still looks really, really good, it's because a lot of those old movies that were shot on film can be really, really high resolution. Like some of those films are technically 8K resolution. There was just nothing on planet Earth that could display 8K resolution, but it's just sort of how film worked. But that means they can go back, and if you have that film, you can then like redevelop it, reprocess it, and now you can show 8K quality or 4K quality, which is why they upscale so well some of the time. As time went on in the early 2000s, that's when HD started coming out, which was very, very different. It's so crazy. The leap from standard definition to high definition was really, really big, but I feel like it was kind of slow because I remember hearing about it. I remember like literally reading an article in the newspaper about high definition is so clear you can tell which shade of lipstick the news reporter on your evening news will be wearing. I was like, okay, I guess that's useful, maybe. And then I remember going to Circuit City and seeing like the first HD TVs, which were, I think 32 inches max, absurdly expensive and 720p. And I remember like almost pushing my face up against it, like, this is so clear. This is the clearest thing I've ever seen in my life. I feel the same way now when I walk into Costco and there's like a 4,000 inch television just looming over everybody, displaying the most bright, vivid, and wonderful images you've ever seen. And it's like $399. I have a kind of that same level of like, wow, this is crazy. But being able to produce high definition media was really, really tough. And if you remember that time, if you were around at that time and you remember what it was like as TV and movies were starting to switch over to high definition, there was a period of time, especially on lower end productions, like smaller budget television shows or local news things, where there was an adaptation to high definition. And the way I noticed it was that a lot of news anchors wore way too much makeup because suddenly like wrinkles and imperfections were way more evident than they were prior. And people just needed to cover things up. Or I don't know if they just been like really caking on the makeup before, but because you couldn't really tell, it didn't look as weird. And now when you could see all the detail, like this person looks like a person trying, like a non-human trying to be a human. It was all that kind of stuff. But eventually what that meant though was you had things looking just really crisp and absolutely excellent at the same time that you have digital media trying to overtake film media in the actual like movie and television industry, which takes us to 2007 when this camera right here, the Red 1, was released. This camera is a now my brain is farting on me. This is a 4K camera, right? Yeah, this is a 4K. Sorry, the reason I'm confused, this is a 4K camera. It's a digital camera, Super 35. The reason I can't remember the resolution is because I don't have, this is one of the problems with Red, this camera could run on old hard drives that they don't make anymore and are very tough to find because they're all broken because they were old hard drives from 2007, or it runs on CF cards, which are very easy to find, but it will only accept red CF cards, which they don't make anymore. So I can connect like a Samsung T5 SSD to this, which is infinitely better than any CF card that existed in 2007. But because it's not an official Red product, this camera sees that as being a problem and then will limit me to 2.7K or 2K resolution when recording. So I've only ever actually been able to use this at 2K resolution, which still looks really, really nice and is still really, really fun. But it's like, come on, just because I don't have an 8 gigabyte CF card, you're not going to let me do the... Even current Red media won't work because it's not supported for this camera. That's neither here nor there. Point being is that in 2007, this camera came out, which is a very high quality camera that can shoot amazing looking images. Speaking of David Fincher, he used these cameras to film The Social Network on, which is a great looking movie, and all kinds of other stuff was filmed with these cameras. The retail price for this was $17,500, which is a lot of money. Like, don't get me wrong, especially 2007, like going back in time 15 years, $17,000. Not an insignificant amount of money. But prior to that, if you wanted a professional film camera, you kind of couldn't get, like, it wasn't really an option. You could rent one. That was really the only way to go, was to rent something. You couldn't like privately own it. Maybe like a small production house could buy a camera, but like nobody's buying a Panavision camera. You have to rent them, all that kind of stuff. And then you have to pay to process the film, which film is insanely expensive on its own. And then processing film is expensive. So if you wonder sometimes why there are movies, especially lower budget movies, where you're like, this seems like a mistake or a continuity error. Why wouldn't they just fix that? The reason is usually because they literally didn't have enough feet of film footage to do that. And it was kind of like, well, we only have this many feet of film left and we have this many scenes to shoot. So if we use more of our film to redo this mistake here, we're not going to be able to film this scene over here. So we're just going to have to live with the mistake here. Then you have a digital camera where it's like just delete the file and re-record over it, or transfer the file to a computer or a hard drive. And then, we'll just keep recording. That is hugely different. And $17,000, it's not out of the realm of an individual. It's definitely not out of the realm of a company or a production, like a production house or something. And it's definitely not out of the realm of a few people. Like if you're a filmmaking group or a team or something, and you want to, everybody pitches in $5,000 to buy a camera or something, then you can get yourselves a legit Hollywood filmmaking camera, which is crazy. So we're going from basically you either get stuck with the Handycam, the XL1, which was like, hey, for $4,000, you can get a broadcast camera. As soon as high definition came out, this died because it did not, doesn't work. It does not look good. It's not HD, does not work. If you want high definition, you don't really have an option. You need to spend tens of $80,000, $90,000 on something, or just try to constantly rent something. And, that can be insanely expensive too and cause a whole bunch of different issues. So suddenly here's something that's not cheap, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And then normal people could make what previously could only be the kinds of quality you would see from, movie studios and stuff. The very next year, in 2008, is when Canon released the 5D Mark II. And I know that's not, I think a Nikon camera was actually the first DSLR to shoot video, but the implementation, there's a reason people say the 5D Mark II was the first one, because it was really the first one that was usable. And it was, as I understand it, not unlike the multiplayer mode in GoldenEye for Nintendo 64. So if you ever play that or you're familiar with it, GoldenEye for Nintendo 64 multiplayer mode is like one of the highlight key, most amazing features of that game. Apparently, from everything I've read, and I believe this is true, that game was produced on like a shoestring budget by a very small team of people. And like right before it was done, basically somebody was like, hey, I think we could do like this multiplayer thing. We have all the levels, we have all the, we have all the maps. We can just enable this mode. It's kind of like 4 screens and people could do this, and just sort of, even without permission, just sort of threw this afterthought of a feature in there that became not just a defining feature for that game, but then kind of launched first-person shooter, battle, multiplayer. Like a lot of what gaming is now sort of sparked from that, which is pretty crazy. Sort of the same thing with the Canon 5D Mark II, where it was a photo camera, and I forget the exact story, but essentially Canon knew that a lot of people who were going to use that camera were going to be photojournalists, and they were going to be taking photos of things for newspapers and magazines and whatever, that kind of stuff for media. And they thought, I bet you those people would want to get interviews sometimes. If we could just record a little bit of video, they could record video interviews. I don't know if they even thought that would be for like, I think they almost thought of it more of as like an audio recorder. Like, hey, you got your camera, you could just interview someone and then you can type it out or whatever. But you're using a full frame sensor with these beautiful L-series full frame lenses, and you get this really nice 1080 video. The 5D Mark II, if you've ever used one, clearly video is an afterthought. Like there is no record button on it. The video menu is incredibly limited. You can install after, third party extension kind of things like Magic Lantern to enable a lot more video features. The built-in video functionality is very basic, but it lets you record video. The 5D Mark II retailed for, I think, $3,000. So now for $3,000, cheaper than the Canon L1 or even at the similar price, you have an interchangeable lens, high definition, full frame camera that can record with any of these lenses that would traditionally only be used for photography can now be used for videography, and you're getting stuff that is very much within the reach of an average person. You're getting stuff that looks a lot like it could be on TV or in a movie theater. And that's when that, like, you know, the so-called DSLR revolution, which is a fair name to call it, kicked off. And that's when, you know, that's when YouTube channels like Film Riot and DSLR Video Shooter and Learning DSLR Video and all that stuff took off, because it was like people teaching you how to do this stuff. You as an individual can get this tool. You can save up a few paychecks, save up for a while. You could get $3,000 and get this tool. And then all you need to do is figure out lighting, composition, and things are going to look amazing. Like you can make something that doesn't look like anything anyone has ever seen before coming from individuals. It was absolutely insane. Get the nifty 50, $100 lens, 50 millimeter 1.8 lens that's going to like give you super shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field. There is a reason I pretty much always film this shot at f1.4, and that's because I grew up with this, which has no depth of field. Unless you know, if you zoom in all the way, you can get a compressed background and sort of a shallow depth of field, but you're not going to get a wide shot with a blurry background. Are you kidding me? No, that can only happen through, you know, being able to use those kind of prime lenses on a nice big sensor. And it's just this amazing thing. 2 years later, Canon came out with the T2i. They did the T1i, which had this weird video feature. We'll just kind of skip over it. The T2i in 2010, that was the camera. It was a crop sensor camera. It was a Rebel, so it's like a $700 or $800 camera. Crop sensor, so that's a big difference between the 5D Mark II, but otherwise the exact same level of video quality as the 5D Mark II. So it's just crop versus full frame sensor. Those differences there, but otherwise no difference. Beautiful 1080 video, no autofocus, nothing like that. It actually had a record button where you're like, whoa, they really thought about video when they were making this camera. And then everything from there just took off. For Canon, you know, they dominated the DSLR video space for years after that. Other companies like Panasonic got into it. You know, that's where the Sony Alpha, you know, the Sony A7, the original one, which had all these problems because it would overheat and do all these crazy things, but the image quality was really good and it could basically see in the dark because the low light performance was insane. That's where then you went into like the mirrorless thing and you know, all the modern things with Canon, Sony, and all that kind of stuff kind of stemmed from there. But what that meant was, in the span of 3 years, you went from it's impossible for the average person to have anything that's going to look remotely like actually professional, like something that would be in a movie theater, be on television, that's not just a weird local commercial from the 90s. It's not possible. To, with the Red One, it is possible if you have a decent budget, or you can pull together a few people to get something, or, you know, you're part of a company that has a budget, all the way to with the 5D Mark II. If you have a decent amount of discretionary income, $3,000, and you can join on this, that's something that is achievable for, you know, for many people who are committed to wanting to do a thing. To then, if you have $700 or $800, then you have something that's going to be movie theater quality. I have shot and seen footage from both those cameras, the Canon T2i and the 5D Mark II, in movie theaters on the full big friggin' movie screen. And it's amazing, and it looks just fine. It all then comes down to, well, what am I looking at? Is this interesting or is this not interesting? And that to me is incredibly exciting. I know it's sort of taken me a while to get to this point, but that's something I'll never stop being excited about, is that openness and accessibility. That's pre-smart. Well, I guess 2010 is not pre-smartphone, but that was when the iPhone 4 came out. A few years later, people are actually able to shoot decent quality video with their phones. Cameras are just getting better and better. It sounds so cliche right now to say like everybody has access to a camera that can film something that looks amazing. And it's true. It's true. Like it really is. Every camera you have, your phone, whatever phone it is, if it's from the last 4 years, probably has better image quality than this red one does. Probably. And if you have, a mirrorless camera or something, then you're head and shoulders above anything that like was being used professionally just a few years ago. It's absolutely absurd. And so it really sort of levels the playing field. With that, you then end up with like, well, there's a lot of bad stuff that looks really good, right? Like it was really cool in 2008 to see this sort of out of focus, into focus, blurry bokeh stuff of, car lights or something, because we had never seen that before. But in 2022, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. You're playing with the focus on your mirrorless camera, but it's not that interesting. But the tools are there, and that's what I am really excited about. And that is a thing that has popped up in talking about going all the way back to my microphone test that I was talking about. I also did get a number of messages and comments from people that were sort of wanting to be the, I don't know, wanting to advocate for the professional side of things, I guess, because they're not wrong. They're not saying anything wrong. It's people who are essentially sending me their resumes. This is everything that I've ever worked on and why I have, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive kind of thing. And this is why you should never compare a Logitech mic to a Shure SM7B. Keeping in mind, they've never used the Blue Sona. Keeping in mind, this has only existed for 2 months. But sure, just go ahead and write it off entirely because it's new and different. And I guess what it comes down to is just my feelings on this, which are, I think it's incredibly important. This is the thing I'm still working through, so I don't have this together. I think it's incredibly important for there to be that high-end professional skill set and knowledge and understanding. And that's something that needs to be embraced and cultivated and protected, because that's where, that's where the high quality stuff, that's where the knowledge is going to continue on as those people who have been doing it for a long time, retire and move on or pass away. You want those skills to continue on and to continue to exist. You don't want just people trying to fumble their way through a Sony a7S III on an actual movie set or something. You want people who know what they're doing in those positions. And there are specific rules and procedures and things. But I think also that by only looking at that as the end goal, like being at that level as the only way to actually do it and what you should always be working towards, I think that is also incredibly short-sighted, and it's not anything I personally have any interest in doing. Like I don't want to work in Hollywood. I don't want to work on, like, I was 21 years old when I decided, hey, working at a TV station, totally not for me. Bye. Like, I'm not interested in this at all for many, many reasons, but I still love this stuff. And I think that there's a place for that too. I don't think it's one or the other, but I think that's where that kind of enthusiast mindset comes in, where it's like, sure, the Blue Sona might not be everything that the SM7B has proven itself to be over all of these decades, but you know what microphone I'm way more comfortable recommending to someone who's just like, hey, I'm willing to spend a couple $100. I want to upgrade my microphone. Should I get the SM7B? No, you shouldn't. Unless you have a really specific reason that you want that microphone, and it's not just because it's the one you saw on the Joe Rogan show or whatever, get the Blue Sona, because it's going to get you not only is it going to get you 99.9% of the way there, but it's going to do so much more easily. And the small percentage that it doesn't get you there, it's going to take you somewhere else, which is also very interesting and could eventually, over time, become its own thing. I guess sometime last season, I did an episode where we talked about you don't need to like be worthy of your equipment. It might be foolish for somebody who's like, hey, I kind of want to dabble in photography. Should I get this $6,000 Sony A1? Probably not. Financially, likely to be a bad idea. But if you have the budget for it, who cares? Like if someone wants to get an Ari Alexa to film their YouTube talking head tutorials, who cares? That's totally fine to do that. You don't have to be at a certain level. If you can financially handle that without destroying your life, go for it. You don't need to like deserve your equipment. If it's something you want and you're interested in it and it makes you happy and you can afford it responsibly, there's no reason not to go for it. And unfortunately, there's a huge amount of gatekeeping when it comes to equipment. And I've found it, I'm sure other people will find it too, where you will encounter people who will tell you that you don't deserve something, you shouldn't be using something, you have no right to be using that because you don't understand how to use it perfectly. Half the time, the people telling you that also are not actually doing anything themselves. They're just telling you that what you're doing is bad, but you're the one that's actually doing something and they're not actually doing anything. It's funny how that works a lot. But I guess the I'm going to pause this while the dogs are barking. Sorry, that was the FedEx person delivering some equipment that I don't deserve. During that little quick pause, I also added a second. I have the 8-foot Pavo tube that's up in the corner over here, and I added another one there just real quick, just to sort of see what things would look like if they're symmetrical. I don't know. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it's fun if you're watching the video version of this. My point ultimately with all of this, I guess, is going back to what Heather and I were saying about the enthusiast versus the expert. The expert opinion is incredibly important, but I never want to devalue the enthusiast because most people get to the point of even wanting to be an expert by first being an enthusiast, by getting curious about something, being excited about it, and then for them deciding that they want to take it to that like extreme level, whether it's like career professional, whatever that might be. And that's not me. I don't have that. I don't claim to be that. I have never said that I'm an expert. I've never said that I'm a professional. I do have a lot of personal and professional experience with this stuff. And I went and created an absurdly long about page on my website over the past few weeks to kind of explain that history. And people can read that if they want, and they can make their own decisions on whether they think the things I'm telling them are valuable or not. Not being an expert and not wanting to get to that point doesn't mean that I or you want bad advice or to do a bad job, but it means ultimately, like, I guess, you could probably tell me, hey, Tom, instead of spending your time with all these microphones, what you could actually do is get rid of some of the crap on your walls in here and put up some really professional soundproofing, and then everything will sound amazing. You could use just a $60 microphone. It's going to sound like $1 million. You're right. If my goal were to have the absolute best sounding, technically correct audio, that's what I should do. I'm not going to do that because I would not enjoy that. I wouldn't have fun with not having all the really cool things that make me happy in here. I also just don't really care about getting to that level. I don't think that that's the ultimate goal, for me at least, is to getting to that level. It's the same thing with like, yeah, maybe I should be shooting in log profiles and all this stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, it's an incredibly helpful tool. But for me, you know what? I like the colors that come out of my camera. And if I put them in Final Cut and just kind of like, boop, just tweak them around just a little bit, I'm happy with that. So I'll just stick with that for most of the time. That's what works for me. And I don't want to then, I don't want to bend my workflow out of shape just to like check off somebody's box of what I should be doing. Because that is a thing that I have noticed actually a lot. And I found a YouTube video. I shared it on, I can even put a link in the notes here. It's really, really good. It's from a YouTube channel called IAMLXGEND, but it's not spelled exactly like it sounds. And it's a music production YouTube channel. But in that, he's talking about almost a similar thing. And what he is saying is, in the world of music production, there's sort of like this, it's like this pre-approved list of equipment that you need to have. If you want to be a music producer, get this, 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 and this. And not only get those things, but use them this way. Use these settings, use these whatevers. And it's all great advice because it's going to help you create stuff that sounds amazing. But what that means though is everything kind of sounds the same because everybody's just doing the exact same thing with it. Nobody's kind of, what happens if I do this? What happens if I take this and put them together and create something new out of it? It's just not happening anymore. And it's a really great video that kind of goes on and on about that. And it's absolutely excellent. I think it's called Your Skills Are Killing You or something like that. I feel very similar in the YouTube niche that I am in, or at least on the periphery of, where I feel like there is a lot of really great advice out there. But now for both creators and viewers, it is sort of like, here is the checklist of equipment you must have. Here are the settings that you must use. Here's how it must look and sound in order to be considered good. And then you check all those boxes, and then you just end up with a whole bunch of stuff that looks and sounds exactly the same. And that is boring. So ultimately, I think it's really fun to use the tools that you want to use. And I think that it's absolutely incredible that very normal, average people can have access to stuff that can give you the quality that you could only previously have gotten from a giant like movie production studio. You can just have that yourself in your friggin' house or your apartment or whatever, your mom's basement, wherever you're at. You can have that stuff, and you can have access to that stuff, and you can use that how you want. And I think you're going to benefit yourself by understanding how to use these things and understanding the basics, but not feeling trapped into, you have to do it that way. It's definitely important. Like if you have a camera that can shoot log, it's probably important to figure out what that means. It's probably important to experiment with that and see if that really works for you and gives you results that really change your workflow. And equally as important for you to realize, it doesn't work for me and I don't really care about that. And then you can do whatever you want with it. Pretty important for you to decide just how you want to do stuff and to do it your way and to use the tools that you have to make the stuff that you like in the way that you want to make it, because then you're going to make stuff that doesn't feel like anything anyone else is making, because nobody else could make it, because it's specifically yours and only the way that you can do it. And a lot of that comes from having access to all of these tools, both new and old, high end, low end, whatever. It's all amazing. And not being afraid to just use that stuff and experiment with that stuff and totally make mistakes with that stuff is really important. And the people out there, not people who just want to help people learn more and get to a higher level of technical expertise, not those people, but the people who want to push others down because they aren't checking all of these technically correct boxes, those people need to just go away or at least be ignored, because that's the thing that's stopping other people from learning and experimenting and growing and just having fun along the way. And those are kind of my thoughts on that right now. Sort of don't know where to go with these feelings that I'm feeling, but it's just, I guess it is kind of a gatekeeping thing that's happening. And sort of like Heather and I talked about, there is sort of this thing that happens when you do put yourself out there, especially if you're showing someone how you do something or even saying how to do something. It's hard for people not to see you as someone who is portraying yourself as an expert. And it's hard for you not to want to then be perceived as an expert. But I think for a lot of us, especially those of us who really just aren't experts, to embrace that is really important. And I don't think that's going to hurt anything. I learned that a lot when I was teaching. Early on, I thought it was very important. I thought that if a student asked me a question I didn't know the answer to, it meant that I was lacking something in my skill set that I should have. And very quickly, especially once I moved into digital media, where everybody really is doing things in an entirely different way, even if we're trying to ultimately do the same thing, give the same project to 150 different students, and I'm going to get 150 different ways of doing that project, even though it's the same prompt with the same tools and the same thing. The approaches are just so different. And I had to quickly learn that, it was far worse for a student to ask me a question like, hey, how do I do this in Final Cut Pro? And for me to not know and then try to fake my way through it, like, oh, well, what you need to do is click on this here. Oh, that's weird. I don't know why that's not working. Your computer must have a problem. I'll call tech support with something stupid like that versus like, oh, I don't know. Let's just Google it. And like the number of times students would laugh at me because I would just open up Google. Like I'd go, I'd be helping them on their computer and I would just open up Google and be like, how to do blah, blah, blah in Final Cut Pro. And they would laugh and then they would quickly stop laughing because we'd find the answer or we'd find something that would point us to the answer. And then we'd solve the problem. And at the end of it, the part where I like had to Google something was forgotten about. The part that was remembered was the part of like, oh, how to get information. So next time, they didn't even necessarily have to ask me the question. They knew how to direct themselves towards the answer themselves. And their problem was solved. So I was able to solve their problem. And then I did have the knowledge. I had done a thing, I had learned it. So the next time someone asked that similar question, I didn't have to pull up Google and I could say, oh, actually, I just learned about this the other day. This is what you do. And that's kind of a cool thing, being able to show that you don't know everything and you don't have there is no right answer with any of this stuff. Like, someone can tell me that the RE20 is the best microphone. It's the one I should be using. Someone else can tell me that it's the Ethos or the Sona or whatever. And guess what? They're all amazing microphones. And it might just come down to the one that I feel like using and the one that I like using. And it's all right. Like none of it is wrong. And that's completely okay because there's almost an infinite number of variables that are at play there. And I think that it's important to understand that. Even just yesterday, here's a good thought to wrap this up on. Just yesterday, Heather and I were talking about, it was our dating anniversary this week, our 5-year dating anniversary. So, I mean, we've been married for 2.5 years now, but it was October 18th, 2017 that we started dating. And so we kind of celebrated that, and we were sort of just talking like, oh yeah, 5 years ago at this time, we were going here and doing this. And she said like, knowing what I know now, you must have been like thinking, what is she doing with her tiny little camera on a GorillaPod? She had a Joby GorillaPod with this Canon S110, a little point and shoot camera. That was her main camera that she had built her main YouTube channel on at the time. And I was like, are you kidding me? I thought you were the coolest person in the world. Like there was no part of me that was judging your camera. And the same thing goes like the Blue Yeti is a really good example. There are a ton of people who will just see a Blue Yeti on screen and just start tearing a person apart for it. Why are you using that microphone? You use it, blah, blah, blah. For me, I'm much more interested in what the person's doing with the thing. And because I do like gear, I am also very interested in why the person is using this. Like, and I don't mean that like, why are you doing this to yourself? I don't mean it in that kind of way, but like Heather and the S110, there's a really cool story there, which is she tried all this other stuff, right? Like she had a Canon T3i, a little Rebel DSLR, and was trying to do the full DSLR vlogging thing because that's what, everybody else was doing, and Casey Neistat was doing this. And she had quickly discovered that carrying this giant camera rig around as a 5'4" woman wasn't that fun and wasn't that easy, and was just, she didn't really enjoy it that much. And it was sort of like too fiddly, and getting good quality was hard, and she kind of messed stuff up a lot. And then this little point and shoot camera that she'd already had for years, it was just like her camera that she'd take on trips. Oh, it has a video function. What? Turn that on. It looks great. It sounds great. Cool. Nobody ever, in however many hundreds of videos she made with that camera, ever said, oh, you're using a bad camera. Like your quality is not very good. It literally never happened. And to me, I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in like, how did you find out that that's the thing you like using? And the reason you found out that camera, even though it's not the camera I would be using for my stuff, but that's the one you're using because you had to do this trial and error thing and find that this works for you, even though this was just some random thing that you had in a drawer for years prior. That's fascinating to me. Like, I think that there's a lot more that can be learned about understanding why people are using what they're using and how they're using it, rather than judging them for using it. And that's probably a good way to wrap this up. But speaking of things that you might want to use, If you do want to give Riverside.fm a try, you can use the link in the description, and don't forget to use promo code TOM15 to get 15% off. Shocking, I know how that works. 15% off your subscription using the link in the description. So thank you again to everybody who helped submit feedback on the microphone thing. If you have any feedback on this episode, feel free, tom@enthusiasmproject.com or hi, my name is tom.com, and just scroll down to you, click on the little record button, and you can record your voice message. Thank you to Bailey for sending in a voice message. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening to me and spending your time with me. And I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your week. And I will see you next time.